sounds great.
This is great attendance.
Yep, I think we're able to have up to like 300 people on our Zoom, so seems like we're getting very close to that. Question from Naudi in the chat about accessing the recording. I will put a link in the chat to how you can sign up for Service Your Alliance's newsletter, and we will make sure that everybody on our newsletter gets a copy both of the recording of this call as well as the presentation that Andrew is going to be presenting after we conclude. So that should go out in a day or two later this week. So great. I think, Andrew, if you're ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Great. Sounds good. All right. Hello, everyone. I want to thank Melissa for inviting us to join you today. My name is Andrew Bronstein, and I'm the Senior Advisor to the Student Loan Ombudsman at the U.S. Department of Education. A word about myself so you know who's on the other end of the line. I have worked in education throughout my career as a 6th grade teacher, an education lawyer at Legal Aid, where I advocated for students with disabilities, an education staffer at the U.S. Senate, and I've now been at the U.S. Department of Education for 6.5 years, where my job has been to help protect borrowers from predatory colleges and to help people with their student loans. I also want to introduce my incredible colleague, Anmar Habib, who is our senior analyst and an outstanding colleague. Are you on the line, Anmar?
I am. Hey, thanks for the introduction, Andrew. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see so many people on this call.
So before we get started, I want to acknowledge, obviously, this is a really exciting news day when it comes to student loans. If you didn't hear, the president made a big announcement this morning about student loan cancellation. We're not going to be answering questions about that announcement today, but I do want to remind you that for many people pursuing public service loan forgiveness, this debt cancellation may not cover their outstanding student loan debt. And also that the deadline for the public service loan forgiveness waiver, which we're going to talk about, still remains October 31st. So for the purposes of today's discussion, I want that to be your big takeaway from the announcement. All of that said, it is a pleasure to speak with you today about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, also known as PSLF. I want to ask, before we jump in further, Melissa, are you able to put the slides up? I'm not seeing them on my screen.
Yep, I can start screen sharing now.
Great. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks so much. So, okay. We're going to talk about public service loan forgiveness today. That's what we're here to discuss. There's going to be a lot of information on the webinar. If you have questions, I want to encourage you to please drop them in the chat. And my colleague, who I just introduced, Anmar, is going to monitor the chat and try and respond in real time. If you ask a question and we don't know the answer, please submit your question to us via email at fsaengagement@ed.gov. And Anmar, if you could please put that email address in the chat so that people can contact us if they have questions, that would be great. And hold on one second. I'm told there are already a bunch of questions in the chat. Let me just take a quick look and see. I think what I'm going to do, if you guys don't mind, is I'm going to jump in and hopefully we'll address some of these questions as we go along. We'll pause along the way so that you can ask questions, and we'll also have time at the end. But I want to make sure, since we have a lot of content, that we jump in. So if you're on this call, odds are you're familiar with the general premise of public service loan forgiveness. The shorthand is, if you work in public service for 10 years and make payments on your federal student loans that whole time, we'll forgive the balance. The reality, as you may know, is more nuanced. The PSLF program forgives the remaining balance on your direct loans after you have made 120 qualifying payments under a qualifying repayment plan while working full-time for a qualifying employer. There's a lot there and a lot of qualifications. Again, under the standard rules, you have to make the right number of payments for the right amount. Oh, they have to be on time. They have to be 120 of them. They have to be in the right repayment plan, the right type of loan, right qualifying employer. It's a lot. So can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the PSLF waiver, which I'm going to talk to you about today, temporarily relaxes some of those rules that we just went through. On October 6th of last year, the department announced a change to PSLF for a limited time. And I'm going to say that again because it's for a limited time only. Borrowers can get credit toward PSLF for past payments that wouldn't ordinarily qualify under the rules of the program. Under the PSLF waiver, borrowers can now get credit for past payments, even if the payments were short, late, on the wrong type of loan, or on the wrong repayment plan. But to take advantage of the waiver, you have to act now. And I'm going to repeat that a few times too, because it's so important. The opportunity to take advantage of the PSLF waiver expires on October 31st. So you have to act now. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm just going to take a peek here at the questions. Okay, yeah, we're gonna cover some of this and some conversation about the announcement. Okay, so the PSLF waiver has made a huge difference for hundreds of thousands of borrowers. This slide is now out of date as of last night, which is exciting. The department has now approved over $10 billion in forgiveness for over 175,000 borrowers through the limited PSLF waiver. The waivers brought another 1.1 million borrowers closer to forgiveness, with the average borrower picking up a year's worth of credit. More than 250,000 borrowers got 2 years or more of additional credit toward forgiveness. And all of these numbers are continuing to grow daily as we continue to process applications and review files. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a really important slide, and we're going to spend some time here. And I want to say one other thing before I get into it. A lot of what we're about to discuss is going to be general rules for the waiver as we're going along. I know you're going to have questions about, does this apply in any particular way to AmeriCorps? What does this look like for AmeriCorps? What does this look like for Peace Corps? And I want to let you know at the outset that we're going to address any specifics as to those programs during this presentation. But all the rules generally apply to everybody. So it's good to have an understanding of it. Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of the waiver. What's changed with PSLF under the waiver? What stayed the same? And what do you need to do in order to benefit from the waiver? First, what's changed? Payments made prior to consolidation are now eligible. What does that mean? A few slides ago, I told you that in order to benefit from PSLF normally, you had to make 120 payments on the right type of loan. We're going to start there because for a limited time, the waiver changes that. If you're looking at the slides, we're on the first bullet point right now. So under normal PSLF rules, before the waiver, only payments on direct loans would count towards your 120 payments. That includes direct consolidation loans and parent plus loans, which we're going to come back to in a few minutes. Again, under normal PSLF rules, only payments on direct loans would count. Payments on FEL loans didn't count towards your 120 payments. FEL loans are loans that were issued by private lenders and guaranteed by the federal government. Didn't count. Under the old normal PSLF rules, payments on Perkins loans didn't count. Perkins loans are loans that were issued by a school and guaranteed by the federal government. Those payments didn't count. Under the waiver, for a limited time only, you can get credit for payments made not only on direct loans, but also for previous payments made on FFEL loans and Perkins loans. That's a really big deal. And let me say it again, for a limited time, if you apply for PSLF during this waiver period, your past payments on FFEL loans and Perkins loans can count towards your 120 payments needed to get PSLF. For hundreds of thousands of borrowers, that's going to mean more credit towards PSLF. Let's think about your loans for a minute and do a little math together. Imagine a scenario where you made 84 payments toward your direct loans that counted toward the 120 that you needed for forgiveness. But you also made 36 payments, 3 years worth, on FFEL loans or Perkins loans. Under normal PSLF rules, those 3 years of payments wouldn't count. But under the waiver, you'd be done. If you applied for forgiveness under the waiver, that would cover it. No more student loan debt. Why? Because, as I mentioned, under the waiver, you can get credit for past payments regardless of the federal loan program. Excuse me for a moment because my dog opened the door and my baby is screaming. I'm just going to close the door. One moment.
Hi, folks. This is Melissa Bender here at Service Year Alliance. I just want to thank folks who are interested in getting a copy of this recording and the presentation. And if you sign up for our newsletter, we will be distributing it in the next couple of days. So make sure you do that. I will put the link again in the chat. And thanks for being here.
Thanks, Melissa. Happy to be here, as are my puppy Bowie and my son. Just to keep things interesting, let me change the math a little bit on the scenario I just offered. Suppose you made 100 payments on your direct loans and 19 payments on FFEL or Perkins. Apply for PSLF under the waiver and you might not get forgiveness today, but you're at 119 payments now. One more monthly payment and you're done. So I share that example just by way of saying, with this waiver, you can either get potentially all of your debt forgiven, and if not, you can at least get significantly closer to the finish line on PSLF. Obviously, this change to the waiver is a really big deal, but it might not mean much to you if you don't know what kinds of federal student loans you have, which is the case for a ton of people. Maybe you don't know if you have direct loans or FFEL loans or Perkins loans. To find out what kinds of federal student loans you have, you can check out your aid summary on studentaid.gov. Go to your aid summary on studentaid.gov. Okay, second bullet point. A few slides ago, I told you that in order to benefit from PSLF, normally you had to make 120 payments not only on the right type of loan, but also on the right repayment plan. For a limited time, the waiver changes that. Under normal PSLF rules, in order to get credit for your past payments, you had to be enrolled in a standard repayment plan or an income-driven repayment plan. Under the waiver, you can get credit for payments made on any repayment plan, including, for example, payments made while on graduated or extended payment plans. I was talking to a borrower last week who had never heard of PSLF, and he had worked for an eligible nonprofit for 7 years. He had about $100,000 in federal student loan debt and had been making payments on a graduated payment plan. Because he applied for PSLF during this waiver period, those 7 years instantly counted. He instantly got 7 years of credit that he otherwise wouldn't have been eligible for. And because he applied, he's going to be done. He's going to be done in 3 years if he continues to work for a qualifying employer. So super cool. This can make a huge, huge difference. One last thing on changes. A few slides ago, I mentioned that your payments had to be paid on time and full under normal PSLF rules. That's true. But under the waiver, we're not looking at how much you paid. We're not looking at whether your payments were on time or late. We're just checking to see that your loans were in repayment status during the relevant periods. So again, these changes under the PSLF waiver have been transformative. And under a year, we've moved from approving 7,000 people under PSLF to over 175,000. It's a huge deal. I also want to acknowledge this is a lot of content. So before we go any further, I'm going to check in with Anmar and see, are there any questions in the chat that you'd like to pass over to me? And if not, I'll just continue and we'll address them later in the session.
There are a few questions. I'm actually responding to someone right now. Sorry, bear with me one sec. Holy wow, you guys are submitting questions fast.
That's great.
No, this is fantastic. Folks are asking about, first of all, about anything that was done prior to 2007. I don't believe that service prior to 2007 counts, but Andrew, I'm going to let you touch on that for just a moment.
That's correct. PSLF statute was enacted in 2007. So this only goes back to employment beginning in January 2007. Then Anmar, if there's any others, if you can just feed them to me verbally.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just sending them over to you.
And Andrew, I do think a lot of the questions that are being asked are going to be addressed later in your presentation, so you can also feel free to.
Yep, I'm looking over now and I'm seeing a lot of AmeriCorps. So I do want to let you all know we are going to address that, like Melissa just said, in a bit. We'll do our best to answer any questions you have that are specific to AmeriCorps. I anticipate there may be questions you have that we can't address today or can't answer today. If that's the case, again, email address that Anmar dropped in the chat, fsaengagement@ed.gov, is a great resource. We'll also give you other ways to get in touch. We'll do our best to answer all the questions that you have, though. Yeah. Can we move to the next slide? Oh, go ahead, Melissa.
Yep, and I was also going to say that we are also taking notes on our end, and in the package with the recording and the PowerPoint, we'll also put together a little Q&A document for people who are on this call.
Great. As I'm glancing over, I do see one question that has been repeated about working for AmeriCorps prior to 2007. Will that count? The answer is no. Only employment beginning in if you worked in an AmeriCorps job in 2007, that would count, but employment prior to 2007 does not. Okay, we talked about what's changed under the PSLF waiver. Now let's talk about one thing that stayed the same. The employment requirements for PSLF still apply. There's no change there. But it's really important, so we're going to cover it. What counts as the right job for PSLF? You have to be employed full-time, working for a qualifying employer when your prior payments were made. So let's break that down. What's full-time? To be full-time, you have to either meet your employer's definition of full-time or hit our baseline of 30 hours per week. What's qualifying employer? First, any government agency counts. That includes federal, state, local, tribal, and military. Second, 501c3 nonprofits count. Third, some other nonprofits count if they provide a qualifying public service. So that includes things like public safety, public health, early childhood education, and a few more. What doesn't count? Part-time jobs that do not add up to full-time. Volunteer work. Work at for-profit entities and labor unions. None of that counts. Here's another really important point on the right job. It's about the employer, not the job. So if you work for a public school, it doesn't matter if you're a teacher or a custodian or a speech language pathologist, it counts. We aren't going to ask what you do. We aren't going to ask how much money you make. It's all about who you work for. It's about who pays the bill. Who's your employer? Here's another really important point on what constitutes the right job. I shouldn't have said who pays the bill, who pays you. If you're unsure about whether your job counts for PSLF, because this call I know is an AmeriCorps call, but your employment may go back to periods where you worked for another nonprofit. Maybe you're not sure whether that employment counts. If you're unsure, we have a standalone employer tool on our website that you can use to see if your employer qualifies. And I'm going to drop that in the chat right now. It's a great resource. I do want to add one qualification to this resource, though, which is you may punch in a nonprofit to this resource and receive feedback that that employer is likely ineligible. I don't want that to dissuade you from applying and trying to get certification for that employer. This is an online resource. You are entitled to provide additional documentation to support your case that this employer should count. So apply anyway, is what I'm trying to say, even if it says likely ineligible. Okay, so we've talked about what's changed under the waiver, that you can get credit for past payments regardless of the loan type, regardless of the payment plan, even if your payments are short or late. We talked about what stayed the same, that you still need to work for a qualifying employer. Now let's talk about what you have to do to take advantage of this amazing opportunity. Next slide, please. I'm just glancing over at the questions. I just graduated and haven't even started my repayments. Does this webinar even apply to me? That's a great question that we get a lot. I'd like to address it now. Absolutely. If you're thinking about applying for public service loan forgiveness in the future, if you're thinking of working in public service, if you're thinking of doing AmeriCorps, all of this information will be really valuable to you in the future. Because you're going to want to understand how public service loan forgiveness works and the possibility of getting your debt forgiven after 10 years. Okay, so you have to act now. When it comes to the waiver, you have to act now. And I'm going to give you the short version and I'm going to give you the slightly longer version. Short version is consolidate your loans if you need to and use the PSLF help tool to apply for PSLF before October 31st. The slightly longer version of this depends on the kinds of loans you have. So as you're listening, you need to ask yourself which of these three buckets applies to you. And as I said, there's going to be this is going to be version 1 of your buckets, and version 2 is AmeriCorps. We're going to talk about it too. Bucket 1, you have direct loans only. This is for people who have direct loans only. If that's you, this is super easy. File a PSLF form for each eligible employer you've worked at since you borrowed the loan. Bucket 2, you previously consolidated your loans into a direct loan. This is if you previously consolidated maybe Fell loans or Perkins loans into a direct loan. If that's your situation, you need to file a PSLF form for each eligible employer you had since you borrowed the loans underlying your direct consolidation loan. So go back in time to the underlying loans and file for certification for all the employers that go back to the dates of those underlying loans. Bucket 3, you have a Fell or a Perkins loan. That's plenty of people. You have 2 steps. And I want to emphasize this. You can do both steps at the same time. Don't do step 1 and then wait and do step 2 later. Step 1, consolidate your loans into the direct loan program. Step 2, file a PSLF form for each eligible employer since you borrowed the loans you're consolidating. So let's summarize the basic action steps before we go on. Consolidate your loans if you need to. Submit your PSLF forms by using the PSLF help tool and do these things by October 31st. All right, let's pause here for just a moment because we have got a lot of questions, and if people are confused about anything we've discussed so far, I don't want that to inhibit people from understanding what we do going forward. So let me just scan through and see if there's anything that we're not going to cover that would be helpful right now. Bear with me for a moment. And Anmar, as I'm scrolling through, if there's any you want to draw to my attention about things we've covered so far.
I sent you a whole bunch. I just DM'd them to you through Teams.
Great, thank you. Oh, that is a whole bunch. Okay, let's see. What if you have 10 years in the nonprofit sector, but maybe not quite 10 years yet of payment? We have to get to that one in a bit because we're going to talk about the IDR adjustment and how periods that you were in forbearance can potentially count towards your 120 payments. So if you ask that question, pay close attention when we're on the IDR adjustment slide in a moment. Okay, I'm scanning through. bear with me, please. Thanks for your patience as I'm looking through the questions. Okay. A lot of these we're going to address. School closure doesn't pertain, I don't think, to PSLF. One of these questions is a really good one that I don't know the answer to, but I'm going to get it. Okay, if I made payments during my student loans while working part-time, do those payments count as PSLF? That's a great question because as I mentioned earlier, you have to be working full-time in order to get PSLF. And that can be in the aggregate. You just have to be working for full-time at once. So let's say you've got one part-time job that's 15 hours a week and another part-time job that's 15 hours a week. If you certify both of those and it's at the same time, then you've got eligible employment. That 30 hours can be in the aggregate. Good question. I see that we got that question a number of times. All right. Some of these questions are really good, but we're going to get to many of them. And I think I'd rather address them at the end so we can get through the content first. But Anmar, keep them coming. And they're great questions. So I'd say keep them coming to all of you. Thank you. Parent Plus loans. Next slide, please. Okay, so this part's a little confusing. I mentioned earlier on the call that the rules for Parent Plus borrowers are a little different. I'm going to walk through that now. These rules can be a little bit wonky, so if this applies to you, pay close attention. First, Parent Plus loans are not excluded from PSLF. It's important to understand, though, that eligibility is based on the parent's employment, not the student's employment. And second, the only way you can get PSLF on your Parent Plus loans is if you consolidate them into an income-driven repayment plan called Income Contingent Repayment. That's ICR. ICR is the least generous of the IDR plans, so Parent Plus borrowers should use the loan simulator to compare how an ICR payment on a consolidation loan compares to a graduated or extended payment that you may be currently making. As for the waiver in Parent Plus loans, unfortunately, Parent Plus loans are not eligible to receive additional credits under the waiver, but you can still consolidate into an income contingent repayment plan and qualify for PSLF. And you can get credit for payments made on other qualifying loans that went into that consolidation. Next slide, please. Okay, the PSLF bonus and the IDR waiver. This is going to be a really important slide. We're getting to AmeriCorps in just a moment, but this one's really important and relevant for AmeriCorps participants, so pay close attention to this. This is another really fun, exciting development at federal student aid called the IDR payment count adjustment. In April of this year, we made a big announcement about income-driven repayment plans, IDR plans, that'll help a lot of borrowers who are pursuing PSLF, including many of you on this call. To give you some context, this was an adjustment that we announced because we recognized that some servicers were steering borrowers toward long-term forbearance, when instead, those same borrowers could have been signed up for an income-driven repayment plan, paying as low as $0 a month and getting credit toward their payment counts for PSLF. So here's what we are doing to help borrowers who were steered into forbearance and what it means for PSLF. First, borrowers that have had 12 or more months of consecutive forbearance or 36 or more months of cumulative forbearance. Prior to March of 2020, before the payment pause, will receive PSLF credit for those periods of time if qualifying employment is certified for the same period. Those changes, that increase to your PSLF payment count, will happen automatically later this year. A commonly asked question is, does the time I spent in forbearance during the payment pause count towards the 12 consecutive months or the 36 cumulative months? And I want to answer that. And there's a little nuance there. So the answer to that is no. The time spent in forbearance during the payment pause doesn't count towards that 12 or that 36. But if you're working for a certified employer and you've certified your employment during the payment pause, that does count generally toward your payment count. It just doesn't count towards specifically the 12 or the 36. So there's a little nuance there, but I wanted to get out in front of that because it's a commonly asked question. And if you have follow-up questions about that, I'd be happy to say it again or answer them.
Andrew, I have a quick question, which I think is coming up for a lot of folks in the chat.
Great.
We have a number of AmeriCorps alums on here, in addition to Peace Corps alums, and it is quite common for AmeriCorps terms of service to be under 12 months. And so I was wondering if you could address what that means for AmeriCorps members who may have put their loans in forbearance for their sub 12-month service term.
Perfect. Teed up the exact next thing I was going to talk about. It's a great question. And now everybody who has that question should know that they should pay really close attention right now. If you are in forbearance for a shorter amount of time than that 12 months consecutively or 36 months cumulatively, you can still ask for PSLF credit if you've certified your employment periods during those certified your employment during those periods of time that you are in forbearance by applying for the waiver and submit a complaint on studentaid.gov explaining that you were encouraged to go into forbearance during that period. Does that answer your question, Melissa? And again, I know that that is a common thing, and we're going to come back to that a little more when we talk about AmeriCorps in a moment.
I think so. My understanding is that you are recommending that everyone apply under the waiver, even if it's under 12 months. So I just wanted to make sure my understanding is correct.
Yes, definitely. That's a great question. And the answer is yes. Additionally, one more thing on this, under the waiver, time spent in any deferment except in-school deferment prior to 2013 is going to count as time of repayment. So this is all great news, but I want to remind you also, it's not going to happen immediately. This one-time adjustment, one-time IDR adjustment is going to take effect later this year. Let's go to the next slide, please. Finally, we got to the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps part, but now I want to answer one other question I saw in the chat because I don't want to forget. A couple people asked, what if I can't get in touch with a former employer? How do I certify my employment? And my advice to you would be to try and track down your W-2 and pay stubs in that case. So I saw that at least twice in the chat, and I wanted to answer it before I forgot. Okay, so there are a couple ways you can qualify for PSLF. And I'm talking specifically now to AmeriCorps and Peace Corps participants, prospective participants, current participants, alumni. I'm going to talk about all of it if possible in this section. First way, and I really like this way, enroll in IDR during your service period for $0 monthly payments that count toward PSLF. Or second way, enroll in economic hardship deferment and use your transition payment to make a lump sum payment Even and if that payment is made within 6 months of the end of your service, it's going to count as 12 qualifying payments toward PSLF. Due to the IDR adjustment, you can get credit for the same service and time on economic hardship deferment without having paid the lump sum. And again, if your loans were in forbearance during the service period, you can only get credit if you meet the long-term forbearance criteria for the IDR adjustment. So that's a lot of content. I think it's helpful to walk through an example. Let's move over to the next slide. And then as we go through these slides, I'm going to give you in a moment kind of like a summary. So if you're a little bit confused, I'm going to go back over it and give you my general advice. Example. When you entered the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps program, you were required to make a monthly payment of $400. So you requested the economic hardship deferment. Under normal rules, you could make a lump sum payment of $4,800 from your transition payment and thus be credited the maximum of 12 qualifying monthly payments toward PSLF forgiveness. Due to the IDR adjustment, which we talked about, you can get credit for the same service and time on economic hardship deferment without having paid the lump sum. So if you serve in the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps for less than 12 months, you can make only the number of payments equal to the number of months you served. For example, a borrower who serves for 6 months can use the lump sum to make a maximum of 6 qualifying payments, regardless of the amount of the lump sum payment. And that's important to know. Okay, here's my general advice for AmeriCorps and Peace Corps participants. And since I broke things down into buckets before, I'm going to do that again. And then I'm going to give you some overarching advice that I think basically applies to everyone on this call. Bucket 1, if you are, and it sounds like we have at least potentially someone on this call who was, if you are a prospective AmeriCorps member, generally, IDR is the way to go. Income-driven repayment is the way to go because you're going to get more credit. Your Siegel Award would only cover what your post-service IDR payment is. So you should be on IDR. Current AmeriCorps members. This is sort of a weird time because you have options, but you're getting all the benefits of the payment pause right now. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, the president has announced this morning that we're extending the payment pause to the end of the year. And I'd encourage you to use your AmeriCorps service to lock in your $0 monthly IDR payments and enjoy the rest of the pause with that. Then when the pause lifts January 1st, you'll continue making IDR payments. So again, my advice to you there is IDR. If you're an alum of the AmeriCorps program, these options don't really matter to you because you've already made your decisions. But what you need to know about the IDR adjustment is, again, like we talked about, you're going to get credit for that whole period of time that you are in forbearance. So wanted to restate that. For a vast majority of AmeriCorps borrowers, 99% of the people on this call, it's going to make more sense for you to do a $0 IDR plan while you're in AmeriCorps. That's your best bet. If you're in that 1%, you think that maybe that's not the case for you, I'd encourage you to shoot us an email, fsaengagement@ed.gov. Anmar, I think you put it in the chat once, but if you could put it in there one more time so it's handy, that would be great. Otherwise, IDR is your best bet. I'm going to, because we have 2 slides left, finish, and then we'll go over all of your AmeriCorps questions. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, forgot about this. I mentioned that when it comes, I don't know if I did mention, when it comes to certifying your employment, you're going to need to have what's called your EIN. That's who your employer, how you identify your employer. Here are the EINs that may be relevant to the people on this call. You have these slides. You don't have to furiously jot this down. Melissa will share it with you. But as you're applying for public service loan forgiveness, you're going to need the EIN for any employer that you're certifying. So here are some helpful ones on the slide.
Andrew, if I could just jump in quickly, we have a lot of questions in the chat from AmeriCorps members who are unsure of whether they should put down the agency or the local nonprofit that they were supporting. My general impression is that whoever was paying your stipend at the time is typically who would certify, which means that AmeriCorps, NCCC, and VISTA would generally put down the agency, whereas AmeriCorps State and National, who are receiving their stipends and living allowances from their host nonprofit, would put their host nonprofit. But I just wanted to clarify with that with you, in case
That's
I'm wrong.
correct. Nope, that's correct. Thank you for clarifying that. I remember I worked with an awesome VISTA member when I was an education lawyer at Legal Aid. If she were applying for public service loan forgiveness now, she would list the agency as her employer. If your W-2 is being reflects a different employer, like a local nonprofit, that's who you're going to submit on your PSLF form. So, okay. Let's go to the next slide, Melissa. Thank you. It's really hard to cover everything in one webinar. Your 100 questions proves it. So this should be your next stop to get information about PSLF, including information about consolidation and information about how to apply. studentaid.gov/PSLF. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so thank you. All right, I'm going to put that in the chat. You might learn, for example, there again, that loans and forbearance due to the payment pause are eligible for PSLF as long as you continued to work for an eligible employer. Another good website specific to the waiver, I'm going to put in the chat. It has lots of answers to lots of frequently asked questions, including, for example, my servicer changed. A lot of people who are on PSLF, you may be aware already that the servicer is changing from FedLoan to MOHELA. What's that about? You can get more information on that at this website. Let's go to the next slide, please. You may want to know, you may have lots of other questions. You may want to know how consolidation impacts your monthly payments or your principal balance or your interest rates. I'm sure you have a lot more questions. You can get a lot more information on studentaid.gov. Here are a lot of different ways to contact us. Again, there's information about the waiver on the top left. We've got the PSLF help tool, which I referenced earlier. That's how you can apply for PSLF. More instructions about what to do with your PSLF form. That's also found on the PSLF form. But you can get all of this on studentaid.gov. Okay, let's get to some questions right after I take a sip of water. Anmar, will you tee some questions up for me? I see you're messaging them, but if there's any that you could verbally pass over to me, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Mostly because I need some water.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to go through all of them, see which ones I should pull.
Are they the ones you've been passing along?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna go through and try and answer as many of these as I can. What if qualifying employers are no longer in business? I think I sort of addressed that earlier. Got to try and track down your W-2 or your pay stubs. Same answer if you can't get a hold of anyone for your PSLF paperwork, W-2s, pay stubs. Do I qualify for the credit while completing my service year, even in 2001? this is someone who completed the program more recently. Unfortunately, you do not get credit for employment before 2007. We got a question. I answered this earlier, and I apologize if I'm going over it twice. Is this only for full-time work, or does part-time count too? Multiple part-time employments at the same time can add up to full-time employment. Our baseline is 30 hours per week. Good question here. With the current COVID-19 waiver on loans, we are not required to pay. And relevant to that question, we just announced today that the payment pause will continue through the end of the year. Does that many, do the payments made since that COVID waiver not count? Is that any payments made since the COVID waiver? I'm not sure if I understand exactly what you're asking, but the gist is, if you continue to work for an employee, if you've certified your employment, continue to work for an eligible employer and you've certified employment and you've applied for PSLF during the waiver period, those months spent in forbearance will count toward your 120. So if you've already certified your employment, great. If not, apply for the waiver and you're going to get credit for the time spent in forbearance during the COVID payment pause. How do I go about completing this since I'm no longer employed by the qualifying employer? W-2's pay stubs. What if we never started paying off our federal student loans? So I would go back to the section we talked about, the IDR payment adjustment. If you spent 12 months consecutively or 30 months cumulatively in forbearance, that will automatically be credited. You should apply now and certify, regardless of when you've paid for your student loans. You're like the perfect candidate for this. You need to apply for PSLF now. Certify all of your past employment, and this is an opportunity for you to get credit. You are a perfect candidate for the PSLF waiver. You should apply. Hold on. One moment. Question about deferment. Does deferment time count toward repayment? Under the waiver, time spent in deferment except in-school deferment prior to 2013 will count toward repayment. If you didn't pay towards your student loans during your AmeriCorps service years, do those service years count as / towards years of payment? You need to certify your employment during that period. And I would go back to, yes, past periods in forbearance can count. And I will also go back to what Melissa asked me about earlier. What if it's 10 months consecutively and not 12? What if it's 35 months cumulatively and not 36? You can submit a complaint on studentaid.gov, allege that you were steered into forbearance, and you'll receive credit. Question about other kinds of nonprofits. I would steer you to our PSLF website. As I mentioned earlier, some other nonprofits can count if they're providing a qualifying service. I would steer you toward our PSLF website that we dropped in the chat, and I would also encourage you to use our new handy employer tool. How do I go about completing this since I'm no longer employed by the qualifying employer? I was an AmeriCorps member for 2 years. I worked as a state substance abuse treatment facility for a year. Your W-2s, your pay stubs. Oh, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to this other one. I'm going to try and find out, and I'm going to email Melissa, or I'm going to try and find out during this call. Hold on one second. Good question. I don't know what this is. I'll come back to you. I'm not going to tell you what the question is. That way you won't know which one I didn't know the answer to. Let's keep going. Okay. Sorry, I'm scrolling back. Okay, I got the answer to the question. Somebody asked, what if you're teaching abroad? Now I'll admit, I didn't know the answer to that question. The answer, unfortunately, is no. It has to be, I'm sorry, I should clarify. The answer is no if it's an abroad employer. if you were teaching through AmeriCorps, teaching abroad through AmeriCorps, for example, that would count. Does that make sense? Any follow-up questions on that point?
A separate question we've encountered a couple of times is for folks who have done multiple years of service. This could be stacking AmeriCorps terms or doing both Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. And folks are interested if they're able to count all of those service terms towards PSLF.
So this is for our superheroes. Yeah.
Our super servers.
Super servers. Yeah, yes. Stack them. That counts. It all counts. Good question.
We've also received a couple of questions from currently serving AmeriCorps members. A lot of AmeriCorps members are steered into forbearance or deferment as opposed to income-driven repayment plans that could even be a $0 payment. So I was just wondering what you would recommend for currently serving Corps members who are interested in taking advantage of this.
I will answer that. Why don't we go back to the slide too? Can you go back a few slides? And that way, as I'm answering it, people can also refer to the slide on the screen. Back. Yes, thank you. Nope, forward. Forward. Wrong way. Other way. Stop. Perfect. Thank you. IDR payment account adjustment. So the question is from current AmeriCorps members who feel they have been steered into forbearance. The department again announced in April this awesome IDR payment count adjustment, one-time adjustment. And I'm going to repeat that if you were steered into forbearance and spent 12 months consecutively or 36 months cumulatively, then automatically, without you taking any action at all, you're going to get PSLF credit. It's not going to happen immediately. It's going to happen later this year. I don't have a date for it. If you were steered into forbearance, but it was less than that amount of time, less than 12 months consecutively, less than 36 months cumulatively, fewer than, I should say, former teacher. You have to apply, submit a complaint on studentaid.gov alleging that you were steered into forbearance, and you will also receive credit for those periods. Thank you for the question, Melissa. What form would we use to certify our terms of service for PSLF? Go use our PSLF help tool, which I believe was on the last slide, and you can find at studentaid.gov. Someone's talking about other kinds of jobs. You said public safety position counts, even if it was a private sector healthcare ? Nonprofits that are not 501c3s, if you do eligible qualifying work, can count, not for-profits. That you have to check using our employer tool. And for more information, you can go to the PSLF websites on studentaid.gov that I shared previously. Okay. Will consolidation of loans? Well, these are good questions. Hold on, I'm going to try and get a few answers to some of your questions that I don't have off the top of my head in real time. And then I'm going to just come back to them. What am I missing here? Are there any that stick out that I haven't addressed? Same question, Melissa.
Yeah, I think a question we've gotten a couple of times is what to do if you can't access your old W-2s. This may be, your employer is closed or no longer operating, but you haven't kept the paperwork from maybe 5-10 years ago.
I don't have the answer to that.
And that's fine. We can always continue this discussion, and I'll make sure to include guidance in whatever we send out to folks afterwards.
Okay. Anwar, do you have off the top of your head I'm going to defer to you on a couple of these because some of these are things that you work on. I'm just going to pitch them back to you in the chat because there's so many questions that I'm, every time I send a message, I lose my spot in line, in order. If you have the answer to these, great. If not, we'll just come back to them.
I don't know that I have the answer to these. I can double check and I can get back to you.
Okay, great. So I think there's 3 minutes left. So guys, to the extent we haven't addressed your questions, there are a few in particular I'm going to look up and I'm going to email them to Melissa so that she has the answers handy and can disseminate them to you. Melissa, since we are right up against time, I'm going to defer to you if there are any particular questions that you have or that you would like to focus our attention on, since there's so many great questions in the chat. There's one more here. Is Mohila the new service provider for Fed loans? Yes, all the loans are moving over from Fed loan to, all the public service loans are moving over from Fed loan to Mohila, and that will happen, Deandra, by the end of September. All right, Melissa, anything else you guys, you wanted to elevate for us?
I think it would be helpful to kind of clarify for folks who might be confused about what you mentioned earlier around transition payments. Peace Corps volunteers who are on their way back generally receive a transition payment. AmeriCorps members, on the other hand, receive a Siegel Education Award, which is functionally similar, but I think that term threw people off. So it would be helpful, I think, to understand, you know, maybe you're several years out from service, you used your Siegel Award, but you didn't do it all at once towards your past loans, and kind of how that would qualify you for the payment piece of the waiver, just to understand a little bit better what that means for AmeriCorps members who may have only used a chunk of their Siegel towards loans or split it up over multiple payments, I think would be helpful.
I think what I'm going to do, Melissa, is I'm going to drop a link in the chat that provides some guidance on that specific point. And I'm going to reiterate my guidance from earlier, which is that the best way to go in general, my advice for 99% of AmeriCorps and Peace Corps participants who are federal student loan borrowers is to be enrolled in a $0 monthly IDR plan. And you're going to be continuing to receive credit every month that you're enrolled in that. I will track down that link and drop it in the chat in just a moment so that people have the link as well.
Yeah, and I thank you. And last question I wanted to ask is, there are a lot of folks who are wondering how they can reach out to AmeriCorps. Maybe they were an AmeriCorps Vista or an AmeriCorps NCCC member, so they were receiving their living stipend directly from the agency. Is there an email address separate from this Peace Corps one that you'd recommend folks reach out to? And if you're not aware, I can also reach out to AmeriCorps and see if they have any recommendations there.
I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
That's fine. I can definitely check in with colleagues at AmeriCorps and find the best certification email there.
Okay.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending this extremely informative webinar today. Thank you so much to Andrew and Anmar from the Department of Education for answering all of our questions and putting together a lot of really helpful information. If you have not done so and you want to receive a recording of this webinar, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint and Q&A, please sign up for Service Year Alliance's newsletter. I've put it several times in the chat and just dropped it here again as well. And we will make sure that you get access to all of these great resources. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you again to Andrew and Anmar, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. And if you are interested in learning more about resources for AmeriCorps and Peace Corps alums, or want to be more involved in our work here at Service Year Alliance, you can check us out and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, guys. Thanks.